let me ask you a couple of things about that, Tommy, if you don't mind. So you should probably walk people through what the English Defence League was, because that's one of the accusations that's leveled against you with regards to being far right. We should also probably take apart this massacre of these young girls, because my understanding is when that first occurred, that rumors were spread that was like a first generation immigrant was involved in the stabbing. Now it turned out that it was a second generation. It was the child of first generation immigrants, and I'm not trying to make a case for that. I'm just trying to lay out the facts, and so it isn't obvious to me. How do you understand the uproar about the stabbings, the murders, in relationship to the furor that's developed on the immigration front? So let's walk through the English Defence League. I'd like to talk about the British National Party too, which you were involved in, that Wikipedia defines as fascist. And so those are two things we can deal with. And then I also want to know how you understand conceptually the connection between your activism and that big rally that you had that was peaceful, and because that had an effect, and there's no reason to assume that didn't increase the probability that protests of the sort that we saw in the aftermath of the stabbing were likely to occur. And how do you construe your own responsibility for the heightened probability that such riots, for example, were likely to occur? So there's a lot of things to walk through. English Defence League, British National Party, and then your understanding of the relationship between your rally and the protests that did degenerate into violence in the UK. Let's see if we can sort that out.
We'll start on the British National Party. So you're right, the British National Party was a fascist political party. And when I was 21 years old, I held my first ever rally, and it was called Ban the Luton Taliban. And it was against the increased Islamisation and jihadist organisations. We spoke about them in our last meeting. Now, when you're drowning, you clutch at straws. And Luton and my town was drowning. And I looked for anyone talking about this issue. The only people I found talking about it were the British National Party. Now, the reason why people know I was a member of the British National Party is because there was a leaked list in this year that I'm talking about. Now, the leaked list showed 5 years. So I joined 1 year, yeah. I don't join the next year. I don't renew my membership, okay? And I'll explain why. So I joined the British National Party. I looked for someone talking about, they held a meeting. I turned up to their meeting. I spoke about it in our last sit down. I said that I was part of a football culture, and there was a large group of us who went to football together. So the British National Party would have been excited that they had boots on the ground in Luton, yeah, young men who were boots on the ground for their activism. Now, when I joined the British National Party, I had no idea that Nick Griffin, who was the leader of it, was the former member of the National Front. As I said, I wasn't political. I was just a young lad. And their first 10 points you'd have to be brain dead not to agree with them. When you go on the website, homes for British pensioners, and get all the 10 points you'd agree with, yeah? So they hold a meeting. We turn up to the meeting as young lads. And this is actually documented by a far left magazine called Searchlight. And it's called When the MIGs, which is Luton's football community, Luton's football hooligan element, the men in gear fell out with the BNP. So we went to a meeting, and when we got to the door, they said, he can't come in, he can't come in. And it was the black lads. And we said, what do you mean they can't come in? And they said, well, you can't be a member of the BNP unless you're white. So we told them, you're not having a meeting in our town then. You're having no meetings in our town. And the BNP was non-existent from this point. Yeah. So non-existent. So 4 years later is when I formed the English Defence League. And from the offset, we were welcome to every colour, every race, everybody. So I formed the English Defence League in 2009. I want to get onto the far right label, because this is provable as well. The media called it far right. From the start, we had a Sikh leader, Gurmit Singh. Okay, great lad. We done more to educate the British public and the predominantly white working class community of what Sikhs have given, what other minorities have given into the UK. And the reason being, I'm from Luton Town, so the majority of my friends aren't white. So the ethos of the English Defence League started with my mindset. We had a Sikh division, a Hindu division, we had a lesbian and gay division, we had a Jewish division. We had divisions from every community. Doesn't sound very far right. Now, let let's not allow the media to decide whether an organisation is far right. There's a national extremism unit within the Metropolitan Police Force, and it's their job to define groups like the English Defence League and the BNP. The BNP were categorised as extreme far right. The English Defence League, the entire time I led it, centrist organisation. So because the media say it once and then say it 100 times and then it gets regurgitated by the media and politicians and all alike, it was far right, it was far right. It was never far right. And it was always judged by the National Extremism Unit of the Metropolitan Police Force, who are professionals and whose job it is to do this and look at groups as to what constitutes actually far right, is that Muslims should enter dialogue. This was their advice, which the officer got absolutely hammered for. But their advice was the English Defence League is a centrist organisation and Muslims should enter dialogue with them. People should listen to them. That was the entirety of the time I led the English Defence League. So I left the English Defence League in 2014-15. So your viewers understand what it was. We were an organisation that brought to the forefront issues which government, media, politicians didn't want to have discussed. They were issues that bring about the failures of open border mass immigration, the effect it has on society, and the reality of living in a town that's been that they've flooded with people of all different cultures. So a group that come about to highlight and bring to the forefront. And remember, grooming, which we spoke about, no one even knew, there was no word grooming. It's a pretty word they give it. There was no word grooming. No one knew of these rape gangs. In fact, everyone was attacked or we were demonised for trying to talk about them. Now, years on, everyone accepts they were a reality, as were many of the problems we spoke about are now accepted as legitimate and accepted as truthful, which is why videos I made years ago have aged well for me and not well for my opposition. It's why people are listening to me now and realising that they lie. It's why it puts them in a bad position and not me. I can sit here and say, well, I told you the truth. And the public who have been crying out for the truth, who are angered, who are scared, at a time like this, when our culture is disappearing, when our country's being flooded, they're looking back over 10, 15 years and they're saying, well, he was telling us the truth. He wasn't lying. And against all the flack and all the attacks and all the imprisonment, they still maintain telling the truth. And that truth isn't far right. It's not even extreme. It's the truth.
Hey there. Okay, well, so a couple of things there. So you said, for example, you're objecting to the labeling of far right. You make the claim that many of your friends aren't Caucasian or aren't white, a very difficult thing to define. You talk about the English Defence League bringing in Sikhs and Jews and people from all sorts of different ethnic groups, but there's also an anti-mass immigration through story in your discussions. And so how do you distinguish between the kind of immigration that has brought you the people that you have had friendships with in Luton and the what is it? Is it the grooming gangs that's drawing the distinction? Like, what is it that you're trying to tell people about immigration, given that you also have friends from all sorts of different ethnic groups and races? And you're also denying any allegations of racism or even ethnic prejudice for that matter. And partly you point to the fact that your English Defence League had different groups of people in it, but also your own friendships. So what makes you convinced that you're not a far right figure? And what is it specifically about immigration that you're trying to object to?
I'm not denying it. I'm actually hated by the far right. I'm despised as a race traitor. As I've made comments, so Angela Merkel, David Cameron, these were all the leaders at the time of the English Defence League. They all come out and said multiculturalism's failed. I went on record as saying, actually, you're all cowards, yeah? Because what's failed, if we want to admit what's failed, Sikhism hasn't failed to integrate or assimilate into British society. The Jews haven't failed. St. Lucians haven't failed. Everyone else, they haven't failed. You are taking a problem that what's failed, and I just speak about my experience from growing up in Luton. And again, I'll set the record straight. Not every Muslim, okay? I'm not saying every Muslim. Some of the best people I've met growing up are Muslim. Some of the people I love and still have relationships are Muslim. And I challenge any journalist, come to Luton and find me Muslims with non-Muslims. And every time when I was leading the English Defence League and a journalist would come and interview me, I said, you walk through the town and you try and find me Muslims with non-Muslims. You won't find them. You'll have the Muslims and the non-Muslims. Now, we didn't create that. We can't be, on our school, I speak about when I grew up, it was the Muslim playground and the non-Muslim playground. So I grew up experiencing this. I experienced the separation, the segregation, the zero assimilation. And I knew something was very, very different. And until, I think in 2011, I was spending 22 weeks of solitary confinement. And I challenge again, anyone listening to do this. Take the Quran.